My mind snapped back as a piece of paper came before my desk. "What's this?" I asked. This is a document from the Central Committee. The Combined Labor Committee, I'm assuming. He continues. "Be sure not to let this get out, okay? Just please take the time to read it. It will mean a lot."
Well, how did it went? We got the word out to our officials in Savoy and Tuscany, those loyal enough to serve in our cause. What about those in Genoa? I made some headway there, but given that would-be monarchist has made his own personal fiefdom, it made the operation hard to avoid his attention. But with the help of our comrade Rizzoni, I doubt if he ever does resist, his resistance won't be so arduous. Come in. Hello, comrades. Pardon me for my delay. Gramsci, my god, I thought you found the revolution in France too enlightening to leave. Well, I did have my inspirations, but most importantly is the replies I got from our comrades over there regarding their assistance. And they have issued their support for us. Here are the documents for the matter. They will be our benefactor, but in due time. An offer I had trouble clarifying. Well then, it's only a matter of time that some snitch spills our operations. So let us be about it. We will not compromise our operations. We know our objectives, and we know what we want for the Italian people. But most importantly, let us make this war the liberation for the proletariat. With that said, let us begin the second phase. Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the second and final part of the Italian Civil War in the world of Kaiserreich. Where we last left off, the divide between the sides had been solidified, and with that, the Civil War has officially been declared. To recap, by the beginning of November, the Republicans have occupied Genoa after months of being sieged. In the east, Republican General Graziani has put an end to his campaign as his supplies ran thin. And in the Kingdom of Italy, King Victor Emmanuel advocates the throne, replacing it with a military junta under Armando Diaz. Now before we continue, lend me your attention to the stats that both sides have by the beginning of November 1919. For the Republicans, military strength is at 100,800. They have control of Italy's industrial cities, and the support from most of Italy's top generals. The downside is that they lack any centralized command, with left and right-wing Republicans bickering and conflicting over ideological agendas. The Kingdom of Italy, the Royalists, on the other hand, have a united command, including naval supremacy and foreign aid coming in from Austria. But they lack the industrial and popular support seen on the Republican side, including military might, with them being at 70,000 or so. Now what about Austria? By November, Austria had limited involvement in the Civil War due to them straining their armies to occupy their new lands claimed during the Great War, one such being the Venetian region, which has been under the grip of social upheaval. As the Civil War broke out, Italians in the Venetian region worked on joining the Republicans, but to little effect, resulting in more bloodshed than opportunities. And as 1919 draws to a close, it seemed the second stage of the Civil War has commenced. Both sides have been mobilized, the borders have been drawn up, but underneath the Republic, a boiling cauldron of resentment, mistrust, and ideological hatred has been heating up, which will spill over, making the war far bloodier and far less humane. Since October 1919, the sides that formed the Republic, the FPBI, left-wing syndicalists, and the right-wing nationalists, have united by a thin thread of common demands, that is the repeal of the Treaty of Villa Giusti and the advocation of the king. Besides that, both sides had interpretations on how they wanted to save Italy, and what measures they were willing to go to create a new one. For the syndicalists, these were radical changes, especially in the regions of Savoy and Tuscany, that saw socialist policies being enforced. Everything from farms, factories, luxury hotels being collectivized, rent and utilities come under the control of unions, and turned luxury hotels into schools and hospitals. But with this came extreme levels of terror. Local militias roaming the cities, hunting down suspected royalists, noble families, and wealthy landowners who are mostly shot on sight. For the nationalists, instead of purging class enemies, it's anyone who's deemed a threat to Italy as a whole. Everyone from governors, union leaders, anarchists, politicians, even Austro POWs are executed across Italy and killed without mercy. They even begin to see their syndicalist counterparts as alien to the Italian way of life, and have occasionally come into violent confrontations with them. The rift between the two factions would grow even wider as news leaks about syndicalist advocate Antonio Gramsci having exchanged talks with the Commune of France to intervene in the war. This would sever any unity the Republic had. For on November 2nd, 1919, syndicalist leadership staged a coup in Turin, declaring to make the Civil War their own. The Nationalists respond with declaring their syndicalist counterparts as traitors, and have begun a desperate purging of syndicalist supporters. But this proved futile, as the regions of Savoy and Tuscany turned to the syndicalist cause. But in Genoa, Emilio de Bono and his army stayed loyal to the Republic. But, in the midst of revolution all around them, they had to make the trek to the safety of Nationalist-controlled Romagna. If they succeed in this gamble, it would mean giving the Nationalists a fighting chance to reverse the coup. So, for 7 days, de Bono marched across syndicalist-occupied Italy, living off the land and scorching the earth as they marched. With the threat of capture not that far behind him, he and his army reached the safety of Parma, the new capital for the Republic. Suspecting the borders were secure, de Bono left to fight the Austrians in the north. But, unfortunately for him, the syndicalists had been quick to mobilize a ragtag army to spread the revolution to the Romagna region, starting with the city of Parma. For if it was captured, it would mean having the window open to invade the rest of the region. Realizing the vitalness of the city, General Pietro Badoglio was put in charge of defending it at all costs. And on December 6, as the Red Army approached, the city became encircled, and the Republic dug in. For 3 weeks, a bloody siege began, with trenches, dugouts, mines, and bunkers strewing across the battlefield. Civilians that stayed joined in digging the trenches and taking care of the dead or the dying. As the 3rd week approached, with supplies dangerously low, and the morale of the soldiers turning into desperation, de Bono sent an army to relieve the city, forcing the syndicalists to withdraw from Parma, and soon from their entire operation to invade the region. For the plan of swiftly turning the Republic to the syndicalists had been compromised, making the Civil War more complicated and more arduous. But more than this, the battle at Parma showed how bloodier the war has become. So many lives lost after having been former comrades once, and now divided again. It seemed that God looked upon the peninsula and found it wanting. By December 18th, Austria began its first offensive into the conflict by capturing the port city of Ravenna. For Austrian General Alexander von Kropoten, this was a prologue to a joint offensive to cut off the rebels in their territory to reach the entrapped army in Milan. Yet, he could not have imagined how the tables will turn. The remnants of the Republic, the Nationalists, seeing their odds stacked against them, took on a risky diplomatic agreement, one that could either make or break the Nationalists. In a secret meeting with the Austrians in Ferrara, they discussed the potential of a peace treaty and, if possible, a military alliance to prevent a socialist takeover. After back-and-forth negotiations, it has been agreed that a peace treaty and a guarantee of Italian independence was granted. Thus, the Austrians, whom the Italians loathed so much, would fight side by side, united to see an Italy that's free from the Red Menace. The final major event of 1919 took place on Christmas Day, where those who turned to the support of the syndicalists had declared in turn the creation of the Italian Socialist Republic, vowing to free Italy of its kings and tyrants. By the 1st of January 1920, the Civil War has shifted to include new factions and alliances. So before continuing into the new year, here's a rundown of the conflict on January 1st. The combatants of the war are now the Royalists, which are the Kingdom of Italy, the Republic of Italy, or Whites for short, the Socialist Republic of Italy, or Reds, and the Austrians, who had been steadily providing support for both the Royalists and the Whites. The SRI, for their part, had been reorganizing, and for 15 days there came an eerie calm across the front lines, as the Sides reassessed their situations. The SRI took advantage of these days to rebuild, and now, with the training of former Italian officers and French advisors, planned an offensive that would mark their supremacy across the peninsula. On January 15, 1920, the militarized border between the SRI and the Kingdom of Italy erupted into conflict. Codenamed Operation Garibaldi, the newly formed First Liberation Army, led by Edmano Rizzoni in the west and Randolfo Biscardi in the east, launched an offensive to take over what remained of the Royalists before Austrian reinforcements could arrive. However, through most of January, the borders between them, though bloody, did not falter. This was due to elaborate trench systems being made back in October. But on the 20th, a violent storm blinded the defenders, provoking the Red Army to at last break the lines. For Biscardi, he had his sights on a vital supply nexus called Ascoli Piceno, the one supply port feeding the Royalist defenders at Arcona. Reaching the city, both the Reds and the Royalists funneled troops into the violent fray for this vital position. But eventually, the battle for Ascoli Piceno turned into a battle against nature. See, with the artillery bombardments leaving swaths of overturned soil on the mountain slopes, the heavy rain that followed turned the landscape into a swampy marsh, and most notoriously, the violent mudslides killing hundreds. After 9 days, the defenders withdrew from the city. The Royalists at Arcona followed suit to the safety of Pescara, leaving Biscardi with 937 square miles of occupied land, but with an exhausted army, forcing him to suspend his advancements. In the west, Rizzoni had more advantage, winning battles at Perugia on the 29th, then at Viterbo, until being bogged down at the heavily defended city of Civitavecchia, the one city leading to the Roman capital. So Rizzoni created a new plan. He'll divert his army to take Lake Bresciano, encircling Civitavecchia from the north, leaving Rome open for the taking. However, the Royalists under Luigi Cadorno were quick to respond, meeting Rizzoni's army at the lake, and for the rest of February, the land surrounding Lake Bresciano would become no man's land. But for Rizzoni, time was not on his side. So, in a desperate move to continue pushing forward, the SRI, with the help of French transports, launched their first amphibious assault at Civitavecchia, but badly organized, it was abandoned days later. With Biscardi's army beaten by bad weather and terrain, and Rizzoni's offensives halted, the chances of occupying southern Italy became more and more inconceivable. As Austrian reinforcements arrived, the war in the south turned against the SRI, putting an end to the offensive by March 3rd. The battles at Operation Garibaldi were among the bloodiest times of the Civil War by far, especially so for the SRI and the Royalists. So shaken by the calamity, the King of Italy reassessed its situations. Since Diaz's season of power, his reign was unpopular, so they first turned to the Duke of Genoa to lead them, to be his successor. He refuses. Eventually, the populace turned to another source of leadership, one that has determined the legitimacy of empires and kings for centuries, the Pope himself. Diaz, seeing his approval, took leave as head of state to return to chief of staff, and the King of Italy turning into a parliamentary system, with Pope Benedict XV as governor of Rome. Reassessing the war, the King of Italy, fearing another invasion, negotiated with the Whites to sign an anti-syndicalist pact, thus a pact of neutrality. The Whites couldn't say no to such an offer. Both have faced the bloodiest days from the Reds, and both have garnered support from Austria. Nevertheless, Austria's support was still at a snail's pace, for one can only hope that it comes sooner than later. At this time, the war has died down. Small-scale warfare continues at the battle lines in the south and northeast, and in Milan, after 7 months, was finally relieved by Kropotkin's army, linking with the dangerously isolated Aosta region to the rest of the Republican zone. But they were not out of the woods. Across the eastern line, words of an upcoming invasion from the Reds was rumored, and on May 18th, it finally came. In a second major attack from the Reds, tens of thousands stormed the Republican zone from 3 directions. First in Romagna, focal point of the offensive, in the south at San Marino and making haste to Ravenna, and in the Aosta region became easily occupied within days. All but those defending the River Po in Lombardy stood firm, but in Romagna it was a different story. Across the whole region, the Whites were overwhelmed. Ravenna was taken, followed by Parma, and soon the final strongholds of the region, the cities of Modena and Bologna, was in danger of turning into a salient. An emergency evacuation was called, and the remnants of the White Army fled beyond the River Po to hold off the Reds. With Romagna occupied, the Reds centered their attacks on Ferrara and towards Milan, costing thousands of casualties on both sides. But beneath the bloodletting, there came more and more cries across the peninsula for one demand. Not for revenge, nor justice, but survival, for peace. It will be in one final act of bloodshed that would legitimize these demands. Fearing that the Reds will extend beyond the river, a miracle act by the Austrian Air Force arrived to destroy the bridges leading across the River Po, effectively cutting off any advancements further east. With the offensives ended, the SRI and the Italian Republic has drained its last bit of strength to continue the war. So, instead, both the Whites, the Royalists, alongside their Austrian support, called for a ceasefire on July 20th with the Reds, bringing an end to the conflict once and for all. In October, the Treaty of Trieste redrew the map of Italy. According to the treaty, Austria recognized the Italian Republic as legitimate, giving them the regions of Veneti, Lombardy, Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia, but declared the SRI as illegitimate, a statement that would loom over the future of the peninsula. The SRI, for their part, also signed a treaty, that of joining the Syndicalist International, making allies with the newly formed Commune of France and later the Union of Britain in 1925, upon which have started a brief panic where the Internationale threatened an attack on Naples if Austria didn't withdraw from the border. When they accepted, the two Sicilies, alongside Sardinia, declared independence, leaving to chart their own course. Thus, by 1925, the final borders of the Italian peninsula have been drawn. Fractured, yes. Damaged, yes. But peace, at last. With everything said and done, the Italian Civil War was by far the most dynamic war seen since the final years of the Great War, and would become a point of great tension between the European superpowers. But to assert a conclusion to this standstill would be far-fetching, so I leave it up to you on its conclusion, an ending only you can decide.
The dirge of these 2 years went silent as I pontificated the ebbs and flows of a frontier that has been left alone during my passings. But the memories that felt unbearable are immune to the passing of time. All that rests between me and that cursed past was that great blanket of rippling seas, the one place where I find solace and penance for my actions. So calm were these tides, repetitive, so simple. For however may my homeland change, no matter how I may have been altered, I know that these tides will not forsake me. May these waters erase the roughness of its rocky surface. Let its tides whisk away the muck of an eroding past. So too may my soul and homeland do the same.